News when you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Ed Kalegi. The Thursday numbers on Wall Street, a down day on Wall Street. The Dow finishing down 1.73%, closing below 40,000. NASDAQ fell just over 3%. The S&P lost nearly 2.25%. The 10-year Treasury yield is at 4.28%. The 2-year yield at 3.77%. In a speech prepared for the Economic Club of Chicago, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell again stressed the central bank's focus on preventing potential tariff-driven price hikes from triggering a more persistent rise in inflation. Powell said the economic impact of tariffs is likely larger than expected.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
Powell also said the effects of trade policy are likely to cause a move away from goals.
Trade now is the focus, and the effects of that are likely to move us away from our goals. So unemployment is likely to go up as the economy slows in all likelihood, and inflation is likely to go up as tariffs find their way, and some part of those tariffs come to be paid by the public.
Bloomberg's Michael McKee on why the markets are reacting negatively post-Powell.
What he did was remind the markets of what they're afraid of. He said the tariffs were bigger than we thought, so inflation is going to be higher than we thought. He also said unemployment would be higher, but unemployment, the labor market is in pretty good shape right now. So that focused everybody's minds on the idea that the Fed is, A, not going to cut rates anytime soon, and B, could conceivably be raising rates. And I think that's what spooked the markets.
Mike McKee speaking with Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. NVIDIA closed down nearly 7% after the chipmaker warned it will report around $5.5 billion in related charges during the fiscal first quarter. President Trump's administration has barred NVIDIA from selling its H20 chip in China, an escalation of Washington's tech battle with Beijing. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
And what we know from the reporting is that the Biden administration itself had considered cracking down on the H20. The H20 is a AI accelerator, a chip that's particularly good at the inference stage, but it exists because NVIDIA made it in 2023 in response to existing technology export controls. What the government is saying now is we don't want you to sell the H20 because we're worried it will end up in a Chinese supercomputer.
Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. Advanced Micro Devices says it expects to take a charge of as much as $800 million after the Trump administration put new restrictions on semiconductor exports to China. AMD came to the conclusion after it completed an initial assessment of a new license requirement for the export of its MI308 products. The Trump administration is preparing to pressure nations to curb trade with China in negotiations over U.S. tariffs. This according to people familiar with the matter. Dozens of nations are seeking reductions or exemptions from President Trump's historic import taxes. In exchange for doing so, the U.S. is set to ask them to take steps limiting China's manufacturing might, a bid to ensure Beijing does not find avenues around Trump's tariffs. Here's Bloomberg's Nancy Cook.
It's not just that they want sort of a better deal with Japan, let's say in the U.S. They also want Japan to take some sort of measures towards China. And they're going to be asking that, the administration is going to be asking that of a lot of the countries that they negotiate with.
Trump's top economic advisors are discussing asking representatives from other nations to impose so-called secondary tariffs, essentially a monetary sanction on imports from certain countries with close China ties. A federal judge said there is probable cause to hold Trump administration officials in criminal contempt of court for sending accused Venezuelan gang members to an El Salvador prison last month, despite his order to immediately halt the deportations. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg issued an order Wednesday saying that officials acted in willful disregard of his verbal order on March 15th to turn around planes carrying Venezuelans now held in a notorious prison in El Salvador. Boasberg had said at a court hearing on April 3rd that the government acted in bad faith throughout the day. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Ed Kalegi. This is Bloomberg.